Hey guys, I'm back. This is the weekly book series where we read a book a week and then we make a video on it. Today we're going to be doing Java Concurrency in Practice by Brian Goetz. Let's get right into it. So we're here now going over the table of contents. This is on Amazon.com. This table of contents is open to the public, so I really hope I don't get copyrighted. Here we have the introduction. Then we have thread safety for chapter number 2. Chapter number 3 is sharing objects, composing objects, building blocks, task execution, cancellation and shutdown, and chapter 8 is all about applying thread pools. Now let's go into each of these chapters in depth. So as you can see, chapter 1 is going to talk about a history of concurrency, the benefit of threads, the risk, and the fact that threads are everywhere. Threads are very, very common nowadays, and it's really important to understand how to work with threads in any language, right? Because once you learn how threads work in one language, you can apply those concepts and skills to most languages. So this book isn't just for people working in Java. It can be applicable to anyone working in threads and concurrent applications anywhere. So chapter 2 is all about thread safety. What is thread safety? What makes a class truly thread safe? And it gives some nice definitions about that. Then it talks about atomicity and how pieces of code should work in one fundamental unit, because when you have two threads running at certain moments, sometimes you're accessing shared information, and you don't want two threads to be accessing and modifying and reading shared information at the same time, because that could cause data corruption and other data race issues. It also talks about locking, and locking is one way to prevent data corruption with threads, and guarding state with locks. Then it talks about liveness and performance, and that's really important because the reason we use threads is because we want to utilize all our CPUs, and we want to make sure they're all running and doing some kind of work. We want to make sure some of these CPUs aren't just sitting idly, right? So we utilize threads and we make sure applications are running concurrently or in parallel, because that will speed up things. So that's one way we can make our code run faster, is by utilizing threads. Another way is through the Java compiler. The Java compiler, as it's compiling your code, makes certain optimizations that will make the code run faster. But sometimes as it's doing that, it risks the thread safety of the class. And that's why we have keywords like volatile and final, because in certain places we'll tell the compiler, hey, don't optimize this piece of code, let it run exactly as it looks. That's just a really simplified overview of that. You can look more into the Java memory model to understand those concepts a bit further. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 is all about sharing objects, visibility, publishing and escape. Publishing and escape and visibility is all about ensuring that when one thread makes changes to shared information, other threads are able to view that shared information. And then it talks about thread confinement and features in the Java language such as thread local, that ensures some pieces of data are associated with one thread only and don't leave that thread's ownership. And then immutability, because as we all know, immutable classes are always thread safe. And safe publication and proper ways to publish shared data. So that's chapter 3. And chapter 4 is all about composing objects, how to design a thread safe class, instance confinement, and then talks about delegating thread safety. That's all about pushing the responsibility of ensuring thread safety to a class or an object or a field that your class is composed of. And some tips on adding functionality to existing thread safe classes, and also a lot about documentation. Documentation is very important when you're building thread safe classes. Chapter 5 is about the building blocks. It talks about some of the collections and all the tools the Java language offers you. Synchronized collections, the concurrent collections, and some other features like the blocking queues and producer consumer pattern. And then also talk about synchronizers, semaphores, gates, latches, and building an official scalable result cache. That's just an example of putting all the tools that we learned so far into one example. Chapter 6 is all about task execution. What are tasks? Well, tasks, you can think of them as kind of the runnables or the callables in the Java language. And what tasks are supposed to do is just what the word implies. They should be able to do one specific feature or one specific task very well. And the tool the Java language offers you to work with those tasks is the executor framework. Not really the thread class, but more so the executor class. And so chapter 6 really goes into depth about the executor framework. Chapter 7 is all about cancellation and shutdown. We have task cancellation, stopping a thread-based service, handling abnormal thread termination, and JVM shutdown. It talks about some features, some tips, and some tools into ensuring that your thread safely dies, right? And he explains how that's something most people miss and don't understand how to do well. So in this chapter, he really goes into depth about the whole idea of thread termination and how to properly do that. And chapter 8 is all about applying thread pools. What are thread pools? How do they work? It really goes in depth on the executor thread pool framework and how to manage a multitude of threads at once, configuring them, setting policies for them, shutdown policies, keeping track of their state, and so on and so forth. Placing couplings between task and execution policies, sizing the thread pools, configuring the thread pool executor, extending it, and parallelizing recursive algorithms. So that's really what the first 8 chapters is about. It's really important. I highly recommend it for anyone wanting to learn about threads. I'm going to link a bunch of videos explaining some of these concepts. Overall, I'll give the first half of the book a 9 out of 10. It was really great. I learned a ton, but it's really important as you're going through this book to supplement it with other material, because this book just gives you a kind of a general overview. It's not going to really go into depth into each really thing, even though it's still super big and it teaches you a lot. But to fully grasp all about threads in the Java language, you need to start playing around with it. You need to start using it, and you need to see as many examples as possible. So I highly recommend supplementing this information with videos from YouTube and Stack Overflow and Google. That's the best way to learn about this book. So that's that. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe, and comment, and tell me how I can improve these videos in the future.